Welcome so much to the Litmaps webinar. We're going to go over the literature review process and conduct research with Litmaps. I'll also be covering a little bit of literature review in general, and we'll just dive into the tool and hopefully help you to get the most out of Litmaps when you're doing your research. To give you an idea of what we're covering today, we're going over the basic literature review process. So I know for some of you this might be very familiar. So basically today we'll go over the basic literature review process and more importantly, how Litmaps fits into that. So a lot of times when you've come across a new tool, there's many tools out there today. It can be really hard to understand, like, where does this actually fit into my process? And each of you probably have your own unique way of doing research, your own unique stack of tools that you use. So this is trying to look at where do we fit in and where would you use Litmaps in your process. And then I'll go over 3 specific use cases for Litmaps. So there are many ways to use the tool. At the core, it's a literature search tool. So it's about finding literature, but we also have other ways that can be applied. So it's a little bit beyond literature review. But because it's so big, I just kind of drilled down into 3 specific use cases, and we'll just go over those and try to make it as useful and actionable as possible. And then I'll just touch for about 2 minutes on pricing and things like that. Those are just really common questions I get. So we are a freemium tool. There's a whole free aspect of the tool that anyone can use. You don't even have to have an account to use our tool. You can just use it completely online anonymously. You can have a free account and do a great deal of things. But if you're going to end up using this tool very much for your literature review, if you're going to be using it all the time to find papers and take advantage of all the features, then I want to think about getting the premium version, which is why I'll discuss the different discount codes and kinds of accessibility options we have for that. And then lastly, we're going to do the questions at the end. So to get started, we'll dive into that general literature review section and where Litmaps fits into your literature review. So in the basic literature review, you start by defining your big research question or topic. You might already be handed this too, right? If you're in a project or a class or you're signed up for some particular lab or project. But what is that thing we're examining? And then the second step is now searching for literature. So this is where Litmaps is really going to come in. And I'll talk about exactly what that looks like. But this is everything from what's the first articles I need to read, unless my advisor or someone else gave them to me. And then what are all the different papers on my topic? What are all the things I need to know here in the scientific literature? And as we're searching, though, we can't just take everything. We need to actually be very thoughtful and critical. So just because a paper says, exactly the right thing, it might not be appropriate for us. So it depends on where is that source from, what journal is it from, what year was it published, all these things that really are, we kind of call them metadata, but there are even more aspects to it than that, right? It can be, is it theory, is it methods? There's many things here. So it's about looking at all the papers you found and which ones are genuinely useful for you or relevant. And then, of course, this is the part that gets everyone, the hair all frazzled because there's quite a lot to do. There's a lot to read. For some literature reviews, maybe you're just looking at a few papers. For some people here, maybe you're reading hundreds of papers just to get an idea of a topic. It can be really intense. And so, reading and analyzing literature, it's a huge component. Staying organized. So once if you have hundreds or thousands of papers, you can't just save a few PDFs here and there, right? It has to be really organized. You got to be in control. So that's its own challenge. And then, of course, writing. And the thing that's actually even connected to all of these, of course, citing and referencing. So we don't separate the fact that we write it all up, right? We have to now connect everything you've written to all the things you have researched. So this is obviously a big and challenging ordeal to do literature review. And for, of course, the more senior researchers or any of the students who've already done one of these, you might know that it's pretty complicated, right? It's not this nice linear pretty thing. It's like very messy. And they're all connected in a way. Like, you might, for example, be writing and then you're like, oh, wait, this paper doesn't quite fill in this thing that I'm writing about right now. Now I need to go back and read more literature. And then now I've read more literature, I need to evaluate those sources. So it's just this huge mixture of steps. And that's why, of course, it's a challenging process. And that's why my kind of main advice, even if you don't end up using Litmaps and you go your own route today or whatever you do, just please, at the very least, don't get lost. Try to stay organized. Do something to keep your lit review organized, because at the very least, this will save you time. So even if you're not using our tool, try to get some kind of strategy, because once you have a good lit review strategy, right, many people here, your researchers, you will keep doing research. So then the next lit review will hopefully be easier because you already have this great method. And there's a lot of online content about this and other very in-depth webinars you can go to on those strategies, but just trying to stay organized is the key. And so that's why we are bringing in Litmaps. So Litmaps itself, we'll talk about the tool a little bit from a high level, but our main use is literature review. And these are the steps we do in that process. So first is, of course, searching. If you look us up online, it's like very obvious that we're a search tool. Like that's what you do. You kind of look for papers, you find papers. That's our core use, but it's also not our only use. We also try to help you a little bit evaluate those sources. So by providing the metadata about different papers, it's not like in our app, you just search, you find a paper and you instantly go to that link. You can see things like the title, the journal, year. We even have some author searching capabilities. So we're trying to help you also that within the app, within your search experience, so to speak, you can also start discerning what's useful and what's not, and like stay organized very early on. And if speaking of organization, that's another core thing that we are trying to help you do as well, is like in your research process, again, like we said, you might have hundreds, thousands of papers. You don't want to just, well, you'll have whatever process you have, but the best way is to stay organized, keeping them in different categories, separating them in whatever way makes sense, and even separating them visually. So instead of just keeping these long lists of papers, seeing them visually on a literature map, which is of course the name Litmaps, literature maps, that's going to be hopefully a big game changer for some of you to help it just make that process much easier when you're managing huge loads of papers. And lastly, a bit of citing and referencing. So here I'll just mention that in general, for perhaps the more junior researchers, if you're not yet using a reference manager, like a reference manager refers to something like Zotero or Mendeley, EndNote, these different programs that help you manage many, many papers. So we sometimes are considered a reference manager, but in a sense, that's not something we really aim to do. So we do have some capabilities, but not all of them. So if you end up having many, many articles, you're likely going to want to rely on one of these other tools. However, for some basic citing and referencing, you can definitely use Litmaps. So it just depends, play around with the tool, see how much you need. If you're, say, an undergraduate student, you might find Litmaps is completely sufficient for your needs because you will just have 50 articles, cite them all, done. If not, then yeah, definitely take a look into reference managers online. And we have a bit of online resources to help also explain what those are and help you. And that's something I'll also touch on later. That's a great question that people bring up, is how do we connect with reference managers? We do have some ways of connecting. So bringing papers between one and the other. So say you have all your articles in Mendeley, you can definitely bring those into Litmaps, and we'll go over exactly how that looks later in the demo. So yeah, and this is just looking at Litmaps from like jumping out of the literature review a little bit and just looking at Litmaps at the high level. So if you're here and you're asking, hey, what is Litmaps? Just like without all this literature review lens, then we are just this kind of broader tool where we are searching for literature, helping you stay organized, even some citation capabilities and very powerful visualizations. That's one of our core things that we do, but in general, most people are coming for search. So that's why we put visualization a little bit lower on this list, even though it's something we do really, really well. And then sharing, of course. So sharing articles, sharing maps, sharing your research. So here we're going to go over just cases for Litmaps. So like I mentioned, there's many ways to use our tool, but I'm just trying to focus on these three perspectives to give us some grounding. So the first is just starting a brand new literature review. So this is particularly useful for the students in the audience. However, even for more senior researchers, if you're diving into a new field, so perhaps you're doing some new interdisciplinary research or you're working with a new lab or a new person, you might still also be beginning a literature review. And so we're going to just take a look at how does that look and what do we do with Litmaps when we're starting a new one. The second is doing a really comprehensive search. So this applies to everyone doing a literature review, right? At a certain point, you've started to explore a topic, but a comprehensive search means you're really diving in. You want to get all the relevant literature. You don't want to miss anything. You want to be completely certain that you're doing a really good coverage of your topic. And this also ties into other keywords, right? Like systematic reviews or umbrella reviews, or like all these more official terms regarding different kinds of literature reviews. These will kind of fit into that category. How can we use that tool to support your, basically anything that requires a really comprehensive search? And lastly, this is a very popular topic in general in the research world. So finding research gaps. I'll dive into this in a bit more detail, but research gaps in general often refer to anything in research that we don't yet understand, that's unexplored, that people haven't focused in on. And in general, that's exactly why this motivates your project, right? So the gap is saying, hey, we don't understand the connection between this and that. There's truly a gap. There's been no paper on that particular thing, and this is why we're going to end up doing research on it. So finding those gaps for the students, perhaps you're already given a project, you already know this is my project, but for some, as we get more and deeper into research, we don't know exactly what's missing. And so just even finding these gaps, finding the really critical missing links in research can be a challenge. And we can also try to use Litmaps to find gaps. Now, for the next part, I do quite a few webinars, so I'm trying to keep this one a little bit more fun than usual. And I figure for each of these use cases, we'll also have a persona. So instead of just going through these use cases, we're going to have someone to remind us of like, what's our real goal here? So for starting a literature review, I actually think of some character, Sherlock Holmes. So he's a famous detective, but he's also known for being quite like a voracious reader and diving into new topics and extremely well-read. And so we'll think of him when we're starting our literature review. So what does it feel like to really dive in, to start from scratch, get a bunch of papers, do this effectively and efficiently in a very Sherlock Holmes manner. And of course, like a detective, you're searching through millions of publications to find what's in it. It's a very detective-like work that we all do as researchers. For comprehensive searching, I actually imagine that this is a little different, right? Comprehensive search isn't something so chaotic like Sherlock Holmes, right? He's a chaotic character. Instead, it's very pedantic. It's very focused. Like you cannot miss anything. You have to be super careful, to be almost a bit compulsive. And so I think of another detective, which is Adrian Monk. This is from an American fictional TV show about detectives. And he is super careful and compulsive. And he's just, I think, represents this really well. And then thirdly, for the research gap, we require a bit of finesse. It takes a bit of it's not so obvious where those gaps are. So I think of Hercule Poirot. So this is another fictional detective. These are all fictional detectives, but he's from the Agatha Christie novel series and he's in TV shows. But he is like a very cool, classy guy. And at the end of every one of those episodes or whatever, when he presents the case, he will only do it when he is completely ready. He will make sure he has all the facts, he has all the information, and only then will he say, here's what happened. And this is what all detectives do, but this really goes to show that when you're looking for a research gap, you can't just, okay, it seems like there's a gap here, let's just dive into the research. You have to be really sure, because otherwise there's lots of research that's redundant, we're missing the fact that someone else did this exact project. We want to avoid those things. We want to be completely certain that we have all the information we need. So that's kind of the fun personas to keep us in track and to hopefully help you remember these different use cases later when you're jumping into the tool. So we'll start by getting into that literature review and just quickly jumping into what are like the key problems when you start a literature review. So for many of us, we've probably already experienced these, that it's quite overwhelming. You don't know where to start. There's tons of information and you don't even know how it connects. That's a really big challenge, especially for some students when you're entering a brand new field. And especially when you don't have any more senior researchers working with you or your advisor isn't familiar with this field. You just don't know where your topics fits into the bigger picture. So it's these particular aspects that we're going to try to address with Litmaps. So for being overwhelmed, we're just going to go into a really simple search strategy, which is what I'll demo in just a minute. So just trying to keep that part very straight, very obvious. And then with too much information, the way we solve that is just by getting to the most important papers fastest. So you don't need to read everything right away, right? You need to read what's the most relevant article for my topic right now. and also knowing where does that topic sit in the literature, that's about connection. So seeing, okay, this article is a well-cited, somewhat older article in my field. So clearly that positions it in a certain place in context. And now I know what's the use of me reading that. That's kind of the idea that we're going for here. So now I will hop over into the app and share my app screen. Once you're in Litmaps and you have set up a free account, this is the page you're dropped into. So for everything in this demo, I'm technically using a premium account. At the end, I'll go over which features were not premium and which were, but just for the the purposes of the webinar, we'll just be using an actual account. So this is, even if you have a free account, this is what your home screen in Litmaps will look like. So it should all be very familiar and reproducible for yourselves. But to get started with that basic, simple literature review search strategy, we can say I'm starting on a brand new topic. I'm very new to the field, and perhaps in most cases we already have a paper or two in mind. So either way, even if you know a few papers, if you know nothing at all, both ways you can go to the Litmaps app. To the top left, you click on this quick search button, and we start by finding some starting papers. So Litmaps itself, it works based on recommending articles from articles. So to even get started, we need to already first identify what is one or more articles on my topic. And so this dialog, this is like any traditional paper lookup. So if you're on Google Scholar or PubMed or any other site where you're just looking at papers from a database, this part of our app is similar. So this part, I'm just going to look for some keywords, or if I already know a paper, I can write that paper name. So one topic that I like to always pull on is just misinformation. I have some, it's quite easy for me to read the titles and understand what those topics are about, rather than some very, more hard science applications. So for this, we're looking at this, just for the example of the webinar, the misinformation in social media in a particular country. So here's understanding misinformation in India. That seems pretty relevant. However, I can also note as I go through these starting papers, or as I go through the papers that are returned here, I can see their titles. So their titles tell me immediately how relevant they are. But I can also see this information here. So this shows me the number of references and the number of citations. And this will be relevant in the next step, because the way Litmaps recommends articles is based on the citation network. So how well connected articles are to one another. So in general, when I'm in this stage of my process, I want to find an actually relatively well-cited article, or at least some article with some citations. So in this case, I do think it's relevant, so I'll go ahead and click it. I want to include it, but I want to keep looking for something that's a little more cited as well. So for this one, behavior on social media during the pandemic, that seems relevant, but it's not really about misinformation, so I'll gloss over that. And here's perhaps a bit more relevant. That's social media misinformation and public health. So I can click on this, and it has 7 citations, which is what I like to see, that it has some more citations because it is a bit older. It's a 2020 paper. Great, and it's about India as well. So I have only 2 papers here selected. We don't need many. You can have even just one. One is the minimum. You can have any number as the maximum. And once I've selected these starting articles, I just go ahead and click Explore Related Articles. And this here, we've already accomplished what is like the core offering of Litmaps, which is to say, given all of your input articles, we're going to look through all of their citations and references and this kind of local citation network, all of the papers that they're connected to, and find the top most interconnected papers. And this is why the results I get back here, some of them are connected directly to my one of my input papers. But sometimes we also get suggestions that are connected to one another, or that may not even be connected at all if they're just through co-citations. So here I will briefly describe the map itself and what the visualization is showing, and then we'll go over what the recommendations are in the sidebar. So for the map itself, the dark nodes, those are our inputted papers. And these hollow circles, these are each of our recommendations. The visualization itself is also sorted. So the x-axis is by the date of publication and the y-axis is based on citation count. And this ties into that aspect of when I'm starting a new literature review, I need to find relevant articles, but I also can quickly get overwhelmed by how many papers there are. So the goal here is that we're only giving, a small subset of relevant articles, but by visualizing them, I can quickly pick up on which ones might be relevant for me. So at this point of time in my literature review, I'm actually interested in something that would be more of an important, highly cited article because I'm just learning about the field. I don't necessarily need to read the most latest, like if there were articles down here at the bottom right, that would mean they were like published very recently with very low citations. They might still be very cool, cutting edge work, but I might be less interested in them. I'm more interested in the ones in the top left here. What are the more historical, highly cited works? And so, for example, some of these are not necessarily going to be relevant, right, because they're based on the citations. And in fact, actually, we're seeing a lot of medical papers in this example because one of my papers was very much about health. So that tells me, okay, maybe these starting articles are not actually what I thought they were about. So that's just on me because I always like to do real life examples in real time. So this is a very health related article. So instead, I'll just go back and just pick a new starting article to give you a better idea here. So there's quite a few on health, social media. So this time I'm just going to select a few more starting articles, really focusing on social media misinformation because I'm trying to drill down on this one topic just for the example. And in this case, I actually selected 5 starting articles. And again, the same process here. So at the bottom right of the visualization, I tend to get much more recent work that's less cited because naturally the more recent a paper is, the less citations it has. And then the top left, more highly cited older works. So here now that I have given the algorithm a bit more training papers, I can actually see that my recommended articles are already getting far more targeted. So this one's a systematic literature review on the spread of health-related misinformation. And so this has kind of been an exercise in seeing exactly how the Litmaps algorithm works. It's really based on not just taking a paper and then seeing its relevant literature, but also very quickly drilling down on your specific niche by continuously training and seeing what other relevant literature exists on that. Great. And then the second aspect here, which is highly related, is to say, as I get more and more into this literature review, so perhaps I'll take a step back and say, in real time, what your process would be, you would probably go through each of these in the list, or clicking around them on the map, you can see how they connect to the different articles, what that implies for their particular, like their background, what's their context, and then reading their details. So here I can see its abstract, journal, again, those references and citation counts. And if it seems relevant, then what I can do is actually hit the more like this button. And this just adds it to the map. This is a really easy way to stay organized as well as train the Litmaps algorithm to find even more relevant literature. So here, if I click update results, it will now use that article in addition to my original ones as inputs and rerun the search to find more relevant literature. And all the saved articles here they're saved to your account. So if you go to articles, you can see them all saved here. And as I mentioned before with the reference managers, this is also one area where you can export out articles. So if you were doing this process for a while and you had many, many articles here and you want to save them, you just go ahead and click export. And here you can export as a BibTeX, CSV, RIS, etc. Yeah, so hopefully this kind of summarized those key points that we're looking for when starting literature review. Instead of getting overwhelmed, we just are trying to take a very simple strategy of just doing a quick search, looking for a specific paper or keywords, pulling down just one, maybe a few starting papers, and then immediately getting recommendations relevant to our topic and starting to curate a very targeted list. And to avoid that feeling that there are thousands of papers, we actually can really quickly identify what's most relevant to me. So if I'm looking for the more important, highly cited papers that are highly connected to my field. Looking always at the top left of the visualization, this is where we're going to find those because those have the higher citation counts and they tend to be a bit older. So just looking for those more high impact, broader, more general papers, they're going to be up here. Whereas if I'm curious more about the latest developments, the newest research in this area, then I look to the bottom right. This is the least cited, but also the absolute newest work. So I'll hop back over to my slides and check the questions. Okay, can I please explain a little more about the X and Y axis and the different options in Litmaps? Why might I organize the X axis one way versus another? By Sarah. Thank you so much for that question. This is referring to the fact that here I have these default sorting options, but I can always change those. So if I click on them, then I can select other options for how these axes are sorted. Now, this is getting more into, say, a more advanced approach of analyzing your literature. But instead of just date and citation count, we can use different measures. So changing these primarily depends on what it is you're looking for. So in general, we use date and citation count as a default because that tends to be very useful for what I just described, like piecing out older, more important, newer, less cited. But we have a couple other options that are also really cool. So one is called momentum. Momentum is particularly useful for any researcher when you're looking for something that's very recent, but you don't want to get lost by the fact that most recent things tend to have almost 0 citations or 1 or 2. So that's a natural thing, right? If any paper was published in the last 6 months or last year, it's probably going to have very few citations. And it's hard to distinguish what new papers actually matter in that respect. And so momentum instead lets us adjust for how recent it is. So it's the citation count adjusted for time. And so by pulling the dial back, I essentially get citation count. But if I pull the dial to the right, then I'm adjusting more and more and more for time. So here, this is a pretty old one, right? So 2018 is still going up to the front because it has quite a few citations. So it has 5,000 citations. So even though this dial is all the way over here, it's still barely making a dent in that because it has just so many. But if I push it all the way as far as I can, then what I see is this got pushed down more to the left. So it's being weighed less heavily because it's older, it's 2018. And instead, what's winning now is this 2023 paper with 50 citations. I can pull this up again later, but there's certain maps where this makes a big difference. So say if you had like 60 papers here and you had many papers published after 2022 and just a few of them had 1 or 2 citations, then I can really quickly see what are those, we call them trailblazers in that field, what are having an outsized impact given how recently they're published. And then secondly, I can also take a look at map relevance. So this is a really cool one to see what's the most interconnected literature. The idea here is that this is also pretty useful in terms of starting literature review. It's just a slightly more advanced feature, so I tend to save it. But in general, it's just showing us what are the most interconnected articles. So what that means is this article is farthest to the right. So I'm sorting on x-axis. Whoever farthest to the right has the highest value here. It has the highest map relevance because it has the most connections to all the other articles on my map. So that means if I'm looking for what are the articles that are perhaps going to best describe my topic at this point. So if I want to get the broadest understanding of my topic or like the most general breadth approach, I can select this article and be like, all right, this is a great place for me to start reading because it cites everything else or it connects to everything else, either as a citation or a reference. And that makes perfect sense here because if I look at the title, it's a systematic literature review on the spread of misinformation. So as a systematic lit review, it definitely is going to be a great thing to read. It's going to be very comprehensive. Yes, and then, yeah, you're welcome to play around with those other axes and find where they're useful for you, but those are the main distinguishing ones, as well as we have date, the reference count, and the citation count. I'll just put that back on date for now. And I also tend to gloss over that, but this very first value here, that's just the node size. So by default, it's set to the reference count, but you can also change that to being any of those other values we mentioned. And a few more questions here. So do we export into Zotero? That's what I showed when I showed how you can go to articles, you can click export here and save as a BibTeX, and these BibTeX you can upload into any reference manager, including Zotero. But Zotero is very, very special because there are several ways to integrate with Zotero much more easily, and we are about to release, like probably within a week, a Zotero integration. So right within the app, you will be able to click a button, connect your Zotero account, and it will automatically sync all your collection or all your tags all the time. So we're really stoked for that. In the meantime, I would just recommend that BibTeX import export or using Zotero connector. It's a Google Chrome plugin where you can, same thing, you can have like one-click sync, and it's really great. So Zotero is a really good one. If you're still picking a reference manager, then this one integrates very well with Litmaps. Someone asks how complete of the articles in our database is. Great question. I'm going to go over that towards the end of the presentation. So yeah, feel free to remind me of that. And then there are a few more questions here. Can I export map as a PDF? You can export maps as an image. So here at the bottom right of the figure, we click export figure. Close that. And here, yeah, we can export this as an image. And if I click this little gear icon here, I can change different variables about it, like the resolution and so on. Is the metadata for each paper saved inside the tool? Basically, we'll go into the data at the end, but essentially, yes, all of this data is being sourced from the Litmaps database. And if you want to read any paper in more detail, you click on the title, we will get taken to that article's page. Okay, and just to recap that process here, because I will share the slides afterwards, that's our very basic strategy for searching in Litmaps. We just always, most tutorials I make, I always start by going to quick search, looking for my topic, selecting starting papers, and just going into explore. It's a very simple way to get started with any search. And again, reviewing those recommendations based on how that map is visualized to save time to know which articles are most important for me right now, based on what I'm prioritizing. And the next thing we'll talk about is the comprehensive search. So this is our Monk mode, our Adrian Monk detective use case, because in the comprehensive search, for those doing any kind of in-depth searching, the goal is to make sure we didn't miss anything, to be really clear and organized. And I mean, these reviews in general can get they're well beyond the scope of perhaps Litmaps and a webinar like this. They're very comprehensive reviews if you're doing a systematic review or something like that. But in general, comprehensive searching is something we definitely help with, and to make sure you didn't miss anything, and especially not anything obvious. So to solve this issue, we try and demonstrate how we can search on your own personal library. So if you already have a set of articles using Reference Manager, or you already perhaps have a paper that you're about ready to submit and you have a set of references all built in, you can upload all of these into Litmaps and just double check. Has anything else come out that's more recent? Has anything else been released that's going to be really relevant that I don't want to miss? Likewise, if you are still early on and you have 40, 50 papers on your topic, you can input those and see what's connected. And then similar to the last stage, right, when we're looking at the map, trying to prioritize things to not get overwhelmed, it's the same thing here. You can go through thousands of papers. That's really exhausting. And so our goal here is always to get as targeted as possible. So we want to be comprehensive, but it's unfeasible to read tens of thousands of papers. Instead, we need to be targeted. So customizing the search is the way we target those results and save time searching. And getting out of date, this is what I mentioned also, using searching by date. So making sure, is there any recent publications that came out? And this other thing I'll touch on here is we have automatic alert systems. So you can be automatically emailed when a new paper comes out on that topic. Yeah, so here I wanted to show how we upload articles into Litmaps. So again, I can click quick search at the top left. And here I have the upload file button, which for now is our main way of importing papers. And so whatever reference manager you're using, generally you can export a BibTeX. And so in this example, I've already taken a Zotero collection and exported it as a BibTeX. If you're not sure how to do that, then feel free to ask me at the end of the webinar. I can quickly show how to do that in Zotero, and I'll provide resource links on how we do that in other reference managers. But here we go. I've imported that file. It has some presumably 65 articles. So Litmaps found 64 and it just determined that one was actually a duplicate. So it's going to skip that and just import 64 articles. And now, just like with the original example, I still click Explore Related Articles. And we're going to run that Litmaps algorithm, search algorithm, using all of these articles as an input. So this visualization, you can notice it's changed a bit. So we actually have several visualization options, and they change automatically based on what kind of looks best and what's most useful. So here, because I have so many inputted, we just put all these papers on the inside of the ring, and your recommendations are now on the outside, which you can bounce around. Now, in terms of that comprehensive search, I can again go through the recommendations in the visualization, or I can go through them here in the sidebar, seeing what's relevant. And secondly, the other very relevant thing here, that honing in aspect. So here I can see that I'm getting quite a few old papers. There's a 1999, there before 2000. This is 1965. So say in this case, I'm happy with all of the older work I have. I'm instead interested in what's the newer work in this area. I can just click this date filter at the top, go in and filter based on what's published 2022 and later, and rerun that search. So all of these filters that you're applying, they apply to the results. So I will only now get papers back that are published after 2022. I'll just try this for a subset of these guys so we don't have to expend all of our patience. There we go. Let me just try here. Now we can see all the results are 2022, even 2023. And that's the goal here. It's just in general to say, I might already have a library of papers. I know my topic pretty well, but am I missing anything? And that's what this tried to answer. These are the additional articles that I don't yet have saved that I don't know about. As I'm going through these suggested results, I can again handle it the same way. I can click more like this and add them to my map. So here, this one fell into my map and it's marked as new. And again, if I rerun that search by clicking update results, it will rerun and using this as an input. Additionally, though, the other organizational aspect I can touch on now is called tagging. So if you end up enjoying Litmaps and you also want to use the visualization component to get more organized and to make searches easier, you can save papers. And so saving them, you just click tag. And so say I call this about the topics. These are all articles about dolphin communication and dolphin whistles. So I call it dolphin comms. And so I select that when I've tagged it, it gets marked as this orange color automatically. And just to stay organized here, I'll go ahead and tag all of these with the same color. And now you can see in the far left of the app, I have all of my tags here. So I can click on them anytime. And from here, I can also do a great deal of stuff. So I can always create a new map and explore more articles from them. I can download and export all of these and so on. I can even add articles directly to this collection. And it's these tags that get directly synced into, or will get directly synced into Zotero once we have that release. So this is a really great way to stay organized and ultimately to divide your literature review into different topics or subtopics. So, and basically coloring those and keeping them distinguished to keep clear about your strategy throughout your literature review. And lastly, I can touch on the fact that we also have keyword filters here. So these are the different keywords picked up from my input papers based on their titles and abstracts. And from all of these keywords, I can select one and this way limit my results to those that have this in the title or abstract. And that's another way to kind of drill down faster on the most important papers. And you can add any custom word that we're looking for as well. Okay, so here we went over that Monk comprehensive searching. So just to recap for the slides, we have examples here on how to reproduce those steps. Oh, and automatic alerts. I actually didn't quite have time for that. But if you, on any of your maps, if you go to the home page of the map, so I'll show that in the next demo, we can open monitor and enable monitor. And this is that feature I mentioned that gives you automatic alerts. So you'll be emailed if any new papers are released relevant to your topic. And the Litmaps database itself is updated every week. So if within this last week, a new article has been published or released on the topic and it's connected to your other work, you'll automatically be sent that in your email. It's a really easy way to make sure that you're staying up to date. And again, that is another paid feature of the app. So it's a premium feature. And finally, for research gaps, I will kind of go through this idea. I might not fully demo it, but to give you an idea, research gaps, again, that's anything where we're missing information. This is an area of research that's unexplored. It's not yet understood. It's often motivating the research project. So to find those gaps, there's many challenges there, but this is kind of what I identify as 2 core challenges that Litmaps can help with. So one question is there really a gap, or can I just not find literature on it? Like maybe there is published literature, but I'm just not able to find it. So that distinction can be pretty hard. Or finding interdisciplinary gaps. So there's many different research fields, right? And many of them can interact, but how are they interacting and where are we missing those interactions? That's also its own question. And each of these can be solved to some degree, can be helped by Litmaps. So again, that determining is it there or not is based on customizable search and comprehensive searching. So what we just did in the last step. And finding those gaps, this is where the visualizations come in handy a lot. And so that's what I'll show really briefly in these few minutes. So for the first use case, I think we have mostly covered the comprehensive searching, and that gives you a pretty good idea of, basically taking any set of papers you have and trying to identify, is there really no literature on this topic? If you have a pretty good set of input papers and you run that search and you find 0 recommendations, that doesn't guarantee there is no gap, but it's starting to indicate that there might not be a lot of literature in that intersection that you're looking at. And the best way to actually go about that is by using the keyword searches as well. So say I've curated this collection on a particular topic. If I want to find the intersection of this research with another topic, so that's often a gap, right, is saying, has anyone looked at this kind of, it's like these kinds of dolphin communications with a particular methodology? If I filter that on that particular methodology, I can try to find that intersection of those 2 topics and see what literature might exist on it. As for the other use case, so that finding interdisciplinary gaps, that's a really great example because interdisciplinary gaps are looking at different fields and seeing how they interact. This is something we can do really powerfully with visualizations, and it's easier in a way to do it with visualizations than to do it by looking at long lists of papers. So here's a collection I've already curated on basically on the intersection of these different religions and looking at environmentalism and climate change. So this is none of these are my area of expertise. They're kind of curated based on just interest, but here we have some idea of these different topics and how much research we've done looking at them from that more like ecological perspective. And when I was looking into this topic, apparently this particular religion, Zoroastrianism, has a lot less research when it comes to its environmental lens. Now, of course, it's not like such a well-known practice as these other world religions, so perhaps this makes sense. But this was a really interesting way for me to find that by like curating these different tags and saving them. As you see on the left, I have each of these. I've been looking for those papers in Litmaps and saving them to these different tags, eventually putting them in the visualization here. And what I can also do is then take one particular aspect. So say I take this Zoroastrianism, take all the papers that I have saved here, click on them, click on the options here, and just click Explore in a new Litmap. And so now these are the best papers I could find on this particular niche. So on that intersection, right, of this practice and environmentalism, and looking for suggested results. And here I notice that when I'm doing this search, my results are really not relevant, which is actually a good indication that we just don't have research in this area. And so I can drill down further by even trying to limit those results to the particular practice by passing that in, or that religion, putting that in to make sure I only get papers back that actually mention it by name and so on. But in general, this is actually, it's a bit funny because again, it's that Poirot kind of use case. Finding research gaps isn't easy, and it's hard to tell because, hey, we still see literature here. And so now it takes some finesse to understand, yeah, there's literature that's connected, but it's actually not exactly on my topic. And this is where we get the indicator that, hey, there might not be that a huge amount of research on this particular niche, indicating a potential gap. And additionally, the other thing I can mention here, which we didn't have time earlier, was just how we can change the algorithms. So for example, if you are a more advanced researcher and you're thinking, well, yeah, there's not going to be any recommendations because these guys are just not citing those articles, but they could be out there, then the next thing to try is to actually change up the algorithm. So instead of just relying on how papers are connected, you can rely on their actual semantic content. So this is the similar abstract and title content algorithm. If I just click here, then instead of using connections, Litmaps will just go through all of the articles in the database and look at which ones are most similar based on the actual abstract content and rerun that search, giving those results. So this can be especially useful if, if you're wanting to find something that otherwise wouldn't, that article didn't even know about these and it didn't even have a chance to actually connect. And so it's another way to kind of detect those missing connections among the literature, and again, possible research gaps. So here again, we're getting a lot of different recommendations that are actually, again, not quite on my specific niche and intersection that I'm interested in, which for me, in this case, because I am looking for a gap, this is actually a good result. But in general, this depends very much on your inputted papers and what you're looking for. And so this example, I actually do a much better job at in a much more in-depth video. So it's a very big topic, is finding research gaps. So if you're very keen on this use case, we have about a 20-minute video on the different ways we use Litmaps to do that. And this was just a very high level thing, just to give an idea of like what ways we would use the app to try and help solve that use case. So definitely check out our YouTube Litmaps for a deep dive on that. And that basically sums up those 3 use cases. So just getting started, jumping to a thing, just like the Sherlock Holmes, diving in, getting through the literature and understanding a basic idea of a topic and starting to collect literature on it, versus the comprehensive search. So it's that Monk mode of being super analytical, super precise, not missing any potential papers by using special filters, by turning on monitor, and being very aware of what's out there. And finally, finding that research gap. So that Poirot attitude of, of basically looking for those potential missing links and spending a lot of time making sure that they're actually truly missing, because that is the hardest aspect, I think, of finding those gaps. If anyone here is still brand new to the app and they don't know, is it free? Is it paid? If it is paid, how much is it? Those are really great questions, and we want to make sure we get to them. So it's a freemium tool, which means on the free tool, you can do about 85% of what I've shown in the webinar. So that means simple searching, saving litmaps, and so on. But if you're going to want to be more comprehensive, so any of these really comprehensive searches where if you want to input over 20 papers into a search, or if you want to have more than a couple litmaps, you can use the premium. And of course, we also have team and institutional licenses. So if you're looking at this for your whole group or university, definitely get in touch and do that as well. And this is a really important thing that I think not many of our users know about. We do country parity pricing. So that means depending on what country you're in, there are different prices. So this defaults you for an educational license. So anyone who's affiliated with a university or any educational institution, you get the educational license, whereas any, say, private consultants or in industry, you have the standard license here. For educational license, default is 10 USD a month. So in the United States, for example, this would be our price. But if you are in any of the countries which qualify for country parity discount, you will see this little yellow thing pop up. And this is letting you know that you receive a special discount code and you should use that at checkout. And so as you can see, we have many countries that qualify. So definitely try that. The only way to know your price is to go to that page. You don't have to check out, you just can see it's there. So you can go through the process and check your local pricing. Now, independently of that, just for the webinar, I wanted to include a special promo code in case, you're like, this is great, I definitely want to get premium and not be limited. Then for just the next week, you can use LitWebinar 30 at checkout. And this is going to be most useful for people in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, countries where we're doing parity pricing. You can get an additional 30% off. If you already are in a country with these discount codes, this is not relevant because your discount code will already be bigger than 30%. But otherwise, definitely try to use Webinar 30, and yeah, just for the next week, you can qualify for that. And that's for annual or monthly, anything. And this is just a little promo also, because for the month of June, we're doing completely free trials for institutions. So if you are a professor or an academic, or even a student, really passionate student at your university, and you really want them to consider making the tool accessible for everyone at the institution, or even an organization, governmental organization, we do any kind of organization, then definitely get in touch and request a trial by just going to our site /June24. And yeah, just get in touch. And we are trying to set this up so that way you can get the full experience and see if that's something you want across your organization. And there's much more information on the website about that. Okay, so thank you all so much for your patience. If you have to run, please go ahead. And it was a pleasure to do this webinar for you. I'm going to dive into the questions now. Let me just really quickly review the data questions. So I did promise I would get to that. So really briefly, here's our data. The Litmaps database is sourced from 3 different core databases. So the main one is Semantic Scholar, but we also use Crossref and OpenAlex. And this is 270 million plus articles. Every week, we're getting something like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of new articles, just based on how these databases update. So this is just a comparison against other preeminent tools and databases. We try to be very comprehensive as possible. And what kind of data is it? It is open access metadata. So that doesn't mean that all articles are open access. In fact, we've been meaning to do a breakdown of coverage to discuss exactly what % of our articles are open access, but it does mean that their metadata is open. So you can see their abstract and title and so on. Whether or not you have access to it depends on your setup. So if your institution has access to that article's journal or that publisher, then you can see it. But for us, we are just concerned about getting as many articles as possible into the database. That way you can have as many suggestions as possible. And accessing them is kind of an independent challenge, right? That's a challenge in academia in general. So, and just to give another idea, because this is an often asked question, is about our coverage. So because we source mainly from Semantic Scholar, this is not like a direct answer. We can't say, we haven't not done this analysis independently for our own database, but this is a very good indicator as to what domains you can expect to have covered. So the best way to know is this good for your discipline? Just use the tool, write to us if you feel like it has poor coverage. But otherwise, this is a good indicator that we are pretty well covered across different domains. So Semantic Scholar itself, according to one publication, has a pretty diverse set of domains covered. So instead of being highly specialized, like it's not just medicine or just the humanities, it actually has these different colored bars spread out, which are representing like medicine, sociology, I think there's biochemistry, engineering, arts, computer science. So because it's more diverse, it's a good indicator that you're going to be able to find decent coverage on your domain, but it's not guaranteed. So definitely give it a try, and we are always expanding our database and making it better. So we welcome that feedback when you're finding if your niche is not covered. Great. So yeah, thank you all so much for attending the webinar. It was such a pleasure to share with you the tool, and I hope this helped you better understand what Litmaps is about, the different ways you can use it in your research, and giving you those more concrete examples. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can always contact us through the Litmaps support. So it's actually here in the app, the little support button, or on our website contact page, and just watching out for our emails and social media and so on. So yeah, thank you guys so much for attending. Have an awesome day.